Is it true that every snowflake is unique? Yeah, it is. I mean, sort of. I mean, on one hand, there are similar designs, there are a lot of similarities between snowflakes, but at the end of the day, every snowflake is unique. And the reason why is because of probabilities, because of the number of different ways, the sheer combination of ways at which a snowflake could fall, at which it could tumble, at which it can have different air temperature, pressure, and it's beautiful. It's a beautiful result. You get snow knowing that every single flake is different. And this is a common question when it comes to Bitcoin is how do I know that my seed phrase is safe, right? There's a few thousand words and just 12 of those words in a particular order makes your Bitcoin basically impossible to guess, right? Basically impossible to hack, for lack of a better word. And I think a good example is not just snowflakes, but also a deck of cards. It's something that's a little more practical. It's something we can kind of get our heads around a little bit more of. A deck of cards has 52 cards, right? Obviously, hopefully you've seen a deck of cards before. But how many combinations are there in a deck of cards, in the order of those cards? The answer is 52 factorial. Maybe some of you know how big of a number that is, maybe some of you don't. But the 52 factorial, simply put, is 1 times 2 times 3 times 4 times 5 times 6 all the way up to 52, or vice versa. 52 times 51 times 50 times 49 times 48 down all the way back down to the bottom. And that's a huge number. That's a number that is unimaginable to us. In fact, it's a number so large that every time you shuffle a deck of cards, it is mathematically virtually guaranteed that that particular order of deck of cards has never occurred in human history, and almost certainly, like almost to an indescribable degree, almost certainly is never going to happen again. Just a simple little deck of cards there. Every time you shuffle it when you're playing a game of euchre or you're doing a little magic trick or you're playing slapjack, almost every single time it's a it, basically every single time it's a completely different set. Now, I like playing cards, and that's amazing to me. Thinking that every time I shuffle these cards, it's a different order. Because in my human brain that can't comprehend exponential functions and do the math intuitively, it seems like, oh well, just 52 cards. There's no way that there's that many. But that's the reality. That's the math. And so, if every single order of a deck of cards is an entirely new, never before seen series of cards, well, then it makes perfect sense that every single snowflake is completely different than every other. Because if there's, you know, if we perceive only dozens of ways at which a deck of cards could be done differently, I mean, the way that the snow is blowing in my face here and it's blowing all around the trees, there are billions and trillions and quadrillions and quintillions of different ways at which these snowflakes could fall and acquire different bits of moisture and everything. And so, even something as tiny as a snowflake has, on a human scale, a virtually infinite number of different possibilities. And so, in regards to Bitcoin, even with just a few thousand words for potential seed phrases, and even just with picking 12 of those words, you know, you can basically figure out a, a series that is almost guaranteed to have never occurred before. In fact, there's a famous video out there. I think it's by, oh, what's his name? Three Blue, One Brown, something like that. Great videos about Bitcoin and math in general. And the one specifically on this topic talks about how even if you gave half the people on Earth supercomputers 1 billion times larger, or I think it was even 4 billion times larger than the sum total of data centers and computing power of Google and Amazon and Facebook, all the big tech monopolies, and then you multiplied that human population, Earth, billions of times, and you multiplied the galaxy of these billions of Earths billions of times, and then you do that for a few trillion years, then you might get a Bitcoin seed phrase. So so I I don't have anything particular to say besides just that math is incredible. And the more you look at math and the more you think of the world in math, the more you think of these snowflake, every tree, every leaf, every little insect. Well, there aren't any insects now this time of year, but every tiny little thing that on my human scale seems exactly the same as the next. In reality, it's just as unique and just as different as every iteration before it, and likely every iteration after it. So, as silly as it might seem to defend one's life savings with a random selection of 12 or 24 words out of a few thousand potential options put into a small series, a small order, as absurd as that might sound, it's actually really, really secure because math is on that person's side. And the person that understands that, the person that understands that math and can overlook their human inability to see the person that can overlook their human inability to see beyond their linear thinking and look into the reality of exponentials and the reality of math, to understand the reality of a deck of cards, to understand the reality of all these snowflakes here. Every single snowflake here, every single log and stick and twig, it's all unique. It's mathematically virtually certain to be unique. And so, as long as you trust that, as long as you understand the math, then it's going to be the same thing there. And I think that gets to a larger question too that people have is that why don't more people understand Bitcoin? Why aren't more people buying Bitcoin? I think a lot of the times it's just math. Bitcoiners like to joke that, oh, it's easy, right? Oh, it's just math. It's just math. Do the math. It's just 8th grade level math. And like, yeah, it is. But just because it's 5th grade level math or 11th grade or 8th grade or whatever grade level math, just because it's easy doesn't mean it's intuitive, right? Here in the United States where I'm filming this, we've added more debt in the last 7 years than the first 200 years of our nation's history. Now, 7 years. Okay, I'm 24 years old. That's like less than a third of my life. In less than a third of my life, we added more debt, nominally speaking, than the first 2 centuries of this country's history. That's inconceivable to me. It makes no sense. I can't intuitively understand that. And yet it's true. And so just because the math is easy doesn't mean it's intuitive, right? And so my encouragement, if you're trying to understand Bitcoin, is that it's not just about the math. It's about understanding and retraining your brain to intuitively understand what the math is telling you. And the reality is that with the fiat Ponzi, with political currency units, the math is set up to debase perpetually, exponentially, at an accelerating rate indefinitely. And the reality with Bitcoin is that hash rate explodes on an exponential curve. That price is going to explode on an exponential curve, as it has exploded on an exponential curve, right? Bitcoin's gone from 1 cent to 10 cents to $1 to $10 to $100 to $1,000 to $10,000, now on its way to $100,000 US. And people look at that and they can't intuitively understand it. And so they say it's a bubble. It's too much. It can't go any higher. It can't possibly have any higher returns. Why? Because no other asset in human history has been purely a mathematical concept. We price things in terms of lakefront property or boats or houses or buildings or barrels of oil, things that we can see and touch, things that we understand intuitively. But math, it's really difficult for us to understand intuitively. And so that's why it's hard to understand why Bitcoin has such violent upswings in comparison to everything else, is because it's fundamentally a math-based system. And therefore, fundamentally, as a math-based system, it's inherently going to be harder for us to understand. So, anyway, all that to say is enjoy the beauty. Enjoy if you are one of the few people like me in the, well, at least on the global stage. That's something else interesting to think about, is that there are billions of people who have never seen snow. And so, yeah, the cold weather's not my favorite time of year, but, the math doesn't lie. And the math says that I'm technically in the minority. I'm in the minority of people that gets to enjoy this wonderful, perpetually unique white stuff we call snow. So anyway, maybe that's just my way of putting up with the bitter cold. But all I have to say is appreciate where you are in the world, appreciate the snow, appreciate every time you shuffle a deck of cards. And every time you generate a seed phrase, whether it's with a bunch of dice or it's with a signing device or however you create your seed phrases, just remember that math is on your side. And once you get past the 5th grade level math and you understand it intuitively, you'll see the beauty of that. And it's really, really cool. Some would say cold, maybe. Anyway, that was bad. Enjoy the snow.